And so yesterday we had our baptisms and communion service. So there was no presentation of these subjects yesterday. So we're going back to 2 days ago, when we finished up by looking at the Battle of Raphia. First of all, we wanted to consider what Battle of Raphia actually is, what we expected it to look like, all of the parable lines that take us to our history, and then application. So I want to speak of one concern that I have before we pick up where I left off. It's been an issue a few times this year, and I think it's an issue that is going to perpetuate, and I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but it is something that I think is concerning and not necessarily beneficial to the message. Beginning earlier this week, we started building the logic for this study. We worked on parable teaching, then we went from parable teaching to history, and we went through 5 different histories. We went through the history of the Fourth Direct War. We went through the Pirate War, World War II, the Third Direct War, and World War I. So these are 5 wars that we've made application for to create this application. All 5 wars studied and understood over the last 2 years. We've combined to identify the history, the relationship between the King of the North and the King of the South, all the way from 1989 through to the Sunday Law. And they give us a very complete picture. By understanding, again, just externally the concept of dispensationalism, that the weapons fought in one history portion of Earth's history are different to the weapons fought within another portion of Earth's history. We identify the weapons that are used in this reform line is primarily between the superpowers. It's really information weaponized. And we can go back to 1989 and identify that. This history of 1989 to 91, on so many different ways, in so many different stories, it's this history of 1989 to 91 that becomes connected. So 1989, 1991, we know them as the fall of the Soviet Union. This is the beginning of its fall. The fall of the Soviet Union, or the King of the South, from the deadly wound to the death. We can see it as the first Iraq War. Iraq and Kuwait come to tension in 1989. They go to war in 1990. The United States intervenes and forces Iraq out of Kuwait in 91. So this is the first Iraq War. But the way we understand the information war in our time is this is also the opening up of information. So while we have an increase of knowledge, this movement has an increase of knowledge from 1989 to 91. So the World Wide Web, invented in 1989. First browser created in 1990 and then released in 1991. These 3 years are known as the Big Bang of the Information Age. So the weapons created in this history are information weapons. The they begin to be properly put together at the time of the end. When we want to think about World War I and World War II, it's in the history of World War I that we see a massive revolution take place in the way war is fought. How was war fought before World War I? Go back to the American Civil War. How did they fight? They're just on horseback with their big long guns and spears. They have their bayonets. That's how war was fought. And then you come to World War I and how are they fighting? They have the first tank introduced, the first machine guns, the first, there's quite a list actually. I don't think I have it in front of me, but there's quite a few different, really the modern weaponry of a hot war that we saw in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, those wars, all arose in the early history of World War I. If you were to just think about the tank and the machine gun and the airplanes, chemical warfare, all of those things were created and used in those early years of World War I. So that is raised up in World War I, and that becomes the weaponry used in World War I and World War II. And the reason why I find that so significant, particularly, is when we talk about World War I and World War II in application, we can see that the application of World War I is all information war. World War I primarily teaches us of this war between the King of the North and the King of the South, and it focuses on the history between 1989 and 2014. That's the history where it gives us all of the detail that we're missing in the application of World War II. And what you find people saying who are rejecting this methodology, this message, is that that's fine, all of this is an information war, but the King of the North and the King of the South, they're going to fight a hot war at Panion. And a hot war is going to exist from Panion through to Sunday War. So they're teaching that a hot war is coming, but they're content that right now is an information war. When we look at World War I and World War II, World War I was the beginning of those methods of warfare. World War II employed the same methods of warfare. So all the way through it must be consistent. There was no new weaponry in World War II that wasn't just some tweaking of what began in World War I, whether it was chemical weapons or aircraft or submarines or tanks. So this information war that we see developing in 1989 carries all the way through to the end, all the way through to Sunday Law. And when we say information war, it's just information between our two superpowers, King of the North and the King of the South. We understand that these proxy wars they fight are often hot wars. Not always, but often. I wouldn't call Venezuela a hot war. A hot war between the United States and Russia. Not even in itself, but it's still become a fight over spheres of influence. Syria, you can see, is a hot war in the form of a proxy war, but it's still not a hot war between Russia and the United States. So this whole warfare is a story of information war, fought with proxy wars, fought with over spheres of influence. So we used 5 different parallel histories to build this line, and we've done that over many presentations. And then in our last presentation, we went to our application, we pulled that out from this structure, the dispensation of 2014 to 2019. And we identified how all of these 5 parables that we've been given, that really centre around the 2 world wars primarily, open up 2014 to 19, and we see this relationship between the King of the North and the King of the South in all of its layers and complexity. So one history is going to tell us that in 2014 there's peace and alliance, a friendship begins between Russia and the United States. Another line is going to say that Russia invades the Ukraine and begins this whole conflict in 2014. Both are correct. Both things happen. We're going to see one line tell us that in 2019 war began, and another line is going to tell us war ended. Both are completely accurate concepts. The United States and Russia have been at war since Iraq. There's been this conflict and this fight over spheres of influence since the Iraq War began. It's fought through the presidencies of George Bush Sr. and through Obama. And now we have Trump, who's going to make peace and end that war. He's going to give Vladimir Putin what he wants and establish this good relationship between them. And we may notice that in the last month of 2019, December, just gone, Vladimir Putin stood up and defended Donald Trump, said that the Democrats have no reason to impeach him, and everything that invented the accusations against Trump. So we see their relationship stronger than ever, and you would think that this really was marking peace. At the same time, we have another history that says this has all just been peace. Now the war's really going to begin. Now they're going to come into direct conflict in the near future, leading to panic. Both concepts correct. So I know there are others, and we haven't used Daniel 11 or anything else, but these 5 histories give us a complete and very detailed model of the relationship between Russia and the United States, all the way back to the history of the Afghanistan War in Civil War in 79 to 89. The concern that I wanted to raise and just address briefly is that we've done all that with the presentations and laid a really, really strong argument. And then what has happened is people have taken the conclusion, typed out the conclusion in a couple of dot points and posted it on social media. And that's what I want to discourage. Because something like that, it might sound helpful, it might be done with the most honest-hearted intentions, but it does damage. Because the presentation wasn't even yet uploaded. And before it's even uploaded, Elder Jeff has already started his counterattack. Because he knows everything, he knows the dot points of what I presented, he knows none of the histories, none of the argument, no people watching his presentations or following him know the strength of the argument. The people even in this movement haven't seen the strength of the argument, and they've just been given a conclusion. And for me, that's dangerous. And we've seen that through this year when we teach about equality or the wearing of trousers, and people are given the conclusion and not the step-by-step, methodical laying down of evidence and logic that built to that conclusion. So I would request that if that's a practice, that anyone is engaging in, those posts are taken down and it doesn't happen in the future. And if you see it happen again, correct your brother and sister and ask them not to do that. People are not watching these presentations or following presentations like they should. Most of the people that have left this movement have not followed the increasing light. You can see the two groups of people. One followed the light and they're strong in the message. The other group did not follow. They haven't watched as the light has increased and developed. And even though people might be on the right side now, to receive the conclusion of the studies that we've laid out for a whole week, the vast majority of people are probably not going to go back and actually watch those presentations. And all they'll take is the conclusion, and it's a false sense of security to see the conclusion and not the logic that built to it. So, if you want to share light with your brethren, please direct them to the presentation. Tell them to go back, not just to the presentation where it's presented. Go back a few presentations to when we start laying out the logic, all of the wars. And then you know that by the time you've come to the application, that it's impossible to reject the light. You can see the evidence for yourself. But that's been a consistent issue through the year. If we were to just say on social media, it's been demonstrated that a woman can be ordained an elder, people start leaving the movement. And they're leaving because they're hearing the conclusion before they've actually been directed or had an opportunity to watch the studies that lead to that conclusion. I just want to encourage people to use social media a little more carefully than that. So So we went through this study, we went through our parable histories, we've built this story. I want to read from one other article. It's by the Washington Post. There's two articles I just want to direct you to. Again, if you don't have a subscription and you have trouble accessing them, somebody can copy and paste them into WhatsApp and share them. That's how we have been communicating some of these more difficult articles. It's called Why 2019 Was a Turning Point in the Global Battle for Democracy. So it's an article by the Washington Post. Why 2019 was a turning point. In the global battle for democracy. When the history of our time is written, the year 2019 might stand as a turning point in the battle for liberal democracy. A year when millions of people rose to fight against the forces that for more than a decade have been bulldozing it, trampling the values of free societies, almost unimpeded. The Arab Spring uprising that began the decade starting in Tunisia in 2010, December of 2010, seemed to bring in a new flourishing of freedom. Most of those rebellions soured, and since then we've watched the forces of authoritarianism stage an aggressive comeback. Leaders such as Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Al-Sisi, Erdogan cemented their power and inspired imitators around the world. In 2019, we have finally seen protesters, voters and activists reassert their belief in democratic ideals. The results in most places remain inconclusive, but the battle has been joined. From the United States to Eastern Europe, from Africa to Asia and Latin America. The pivotal contest is taking place in the United States, the country whose deep democratic roots make it well equipped to defy the authoritarian trend. The United States remains a vigorous democracy, but it too is one of the nations where democracy, according to Freedom House, has weakened significantly, thanks in part to a president who launches incessant attacks on the rule of law, fact-based journalism, and other principles and norms of democracy. This year, that president, Donald Trump, was impeached in a historic vote, although the chance that legislators will remove him from office remains almost non-existent. Impeachment signaled that many Americans strongly reject his assault on democratic norms. The 2020 election will determine whether the nation that has been an icon of global freedom will shift to a democratic path or continue on the rutted road to authoritarianism, which would have ominous implications for freedom around the world. The fight was also joined in Eastern Europe, whose people emerged from behind the Iron Curtain to embrace democracy in the late 1980s and early 1990s, only to fall under the spell of autocratic leaders over the past decade from 2010. The combination of mass migration and an economic crisis opens the door to demagogues who have undercut the independence of the judiciary, promoted majoritarian policies and destroyed the independent media. In 2019, however, populist nationalists who had known few defeats at the polls suffered shocking losses in big cities. City mayors don't usually form international political alliances, but in December the mayors of Warsaw, Budapest, Prague and Bratislava announced the Free Cities Alliance, which aims to protect and promote our common values of freedom. It goes through the history of 2019 in various areas. What is highlighted is that 2019 has been a year of civil war across the world, from Latin America to India, Lebanon, Iraq. Whether or not history determines that 2019 was the year when the people started to turn the tide against autocratic nationalists will only be known in retrospect. The forces of democracy joined the battle with ferocity. The outcome of their efforts will become evident in 2020, in what will be the central contest of our time. So they're seeing 2019 as this year of civil war where across the world, not just in America, but centered in America, but also across the world from Israel to India to Turkey to Eastern Europe, there's all of these countries where there is this fight between democracy and this populist nationalistic dictatorship. And they're saying that we will only know, they are saying they will only know in 2020 in the election whether or not this has been a year of success or failure. We all know how that's going to end. So we took this year, 2014 to 2019. We took many of these different countries. We took Syria, Turkey, Venezuela. We talked about Libya. We talked briefly about Yemen. We talked about Africa and Ukraine. And we showed and bookended how we marked this process beginning in 2014 and how that story that began at this waymark reaches its conclusion in the year of 2019, whether it's Syria, the beginning of American and then Russian interference, culminates in 2019. And when it comes to Syria, do we think the conflict over Syria is over? No. How do we know that? One of the stories that we've used is that this is a 10-year Afghanistan proxy war that leads to the defeat of the King of the South, and we use Syria to demonstrate a 10-year proxy war that leads to the defeat of the King of the South. So when did the Syrian civil war begin? 2011. So when is it finally going to end? 2021. So we know full well that the conflict over Syria is not over. We've known that was taught last October 2018, over 14 months ago. So when we see this victory for the King of the South at this waymark, we're not by any stretch of the imagination saying that the conflict over these spheres of influence is over. What we are identifying is that by the time we get to the end of 2019, Vladimir Putin has by far the upper hand and control over these regions. We know full well he's not going to keep it. So because the conclusion of these subjects was placed online, it made its way to Al-Jeff, and I just want to make one point. He's attacking those studies already without understanding or knowing any of the evidence to back it. And what he's saying is that Russia did not have any victory in 2019. So he's saying that Syria, because America has completely relinquished Syria, and Vladimir Putin doesn't, for him, have control over the whole country, though he does, he's saying that therefore Syria cannot be Trump removing the troops from Syria and Vladimir Putin moving into that region does not mean victory for Vladimir Putin. For me that makes no sense. But I want to go away from that part that makes no sense into a deeper problem that had just begun. He's saying that 2019 is not a victory for the King of the South. What's his problem now? He's rejected. Sorry? He's rejecting the Battle of Raphia. What is he teaching? What is the one message that they have? They have one message based on Theodore's chronology. And that is that June 2020 is the beginning of what? July? July 18, 2020 is the beginning of what? Panium. That's 6 months' time. So he's teaching the Battle of Panium, and he just rejected the Battle of Raphia. So somehow, however they want to do that, they're going to need to come up with a logic and an evidence for the Battle of Raphia, not in the last year, but sometime between January and July 2020. They've rejected Raphia, but they're saying we're 6 months from Pani. Can you see that? But that's all I wanted to mention about the logic that they're employing. I'll review this one more time. What these five wars told us. They told us that from 79 to 89 there's a 10-year proxy war. They told us that the King of the North and the King of the South are coming against each other. The King of the North has two important allies, the Mujahideen and the papacy. With these two allies, the King of the North defeats the King of the South. The United States defeats the Soviet Union, but from the inside, by weakening it from the inside. And then 1989, the Berlin Wall falls, November 9. And who does that work? The people within the Eastern Bloc. It's the people within the bloc. You do not see the other kingdom in this way mark, do you? You don't see at all the United States on November 9, 1989. This is a story of the weakening (1989), the King of the South begins to be weakened. The deadly wound that will lead to the death of 1991 when the Soviet Union is abolished, but it begins to be weakened on November 9, 1989. It's from the inside, and in no fashion do you see the King of the North play a part in that work, yes? Okay, so I just want us to remind us of this, what that taught. The King of the South is weakened, but it's from the inside, and you do not see its opponent at that waymark. We also spoke about the Gulf War, how you have particularly the Third Dynasty War, World War I, open up the first war with Iraq. We have the rise of the Taliban that grows out of the Mujahideen. Everything I'm saying on this isn't history, it's what the parable taught us. I'm not adding it, it's come from the parable story. That the Mujahideen, one of the allies, would rise to become the Taliban, and then the United States would come in and wipe them out, destroy their government, overthrow the Taliban. That the alliance between the United States and the papacy would dissolve in the history after 1989. The parable story tells us that out of this conflict within the Middle East, a terrorist organisation would arise known as Al-Qaeda, and they're going to strike the United States, the King of the North. Terrorist attack 9/11. There's going to be two ultimatums. The United States is going to send an ultimatum to Iraq, the same power that it quarrelled with back in the history of 1989, and say, give up your sovereignty, taking that straight from World War I. You have the three allies coming together. Germany, France and Russia send an ultimatum to the United States, saying, stop acting like a dictator. We get that from the Third Dynasty War. 2003, the United States invades Iraq, which is a sphere of influence of the King of the South. We get that from both the Third Dynasty War and World War I. We're going back to our World War II model as we advance, when we see the alliance in 2014 between the two enemies, and Russia invading Ukraine, the sphere of influence that turned from the King of the South in 1989. We get that from the Pirate War. So we have the invasion of Ukraine and the alliance. Then we have Trump being sent by Putin into the United States to overthrow the government, to take on the three branches, the executive, the legislative and the judicial. We get that from World War I and Germany sending Lenin into Russia. November 8, 1917, November 8, 2016. That work of overturning the government occurs. 2018, we see the alliance crumble, but it's also repaired. We get that from the Fourth Dynasty War, World War II. Then we have the Battle of Raphia, and we get this from all of them. They tell us different things about what this battle looks like because there's layers. They tell us about how there's this war over this sphere of influence and how there's been proxy wars fought. And we see that in these wars, these battles for these spheres of influence, one history is going to tell us it's the end, one history is going to tell us it's the beginning. And in 2019, was the United States defeated? Yes, but it also looks like a peace treaty. So I won't repeat that. We've laid all out about the Battle of Raphia. Then we come to the Battle of Panion. We know the United States is going to come back, take all those spheres of influence. We mark Islam at Panion, and the deadly wounds, the beginning of the fall of the King of the South, and the rising up of the papacy. So this is the conclusion of what we have covered in this time frame. I just want us to look at one other subject, and then we'll move on. It's just another demonstration, and we can make this interactive, of why this had to be Donald Trump. Remember what those who don't accept this are teaching, what they believe is that Trump or Clinton, either one of them could have fulfilled all of this history, could have been the one that brought in the Sunday law. We know that Vladimir Putin isn't going to work through Hillary Clinton. We talked about yesterday about the fall of Gaddafi, 2 days ago about the fall of Gaddafi and Clinton's work there, the mortal enemies that Clinton and Vladimir Putin became. But it cannot be Clinton that fulfills this specification. It couldn't be Hillary Clinton that Vladimir Putin was going to send in to take over the US government and drain the swamp, or overthrow the establishment, if we use his own words. If we were to look at the presidents through this history, who's our first president we mark? We have Reagan. Next president? Bush Senior? Then Clinton? Bush Jr.? Obama? Trump? Do you notice a pattern in any of this?
Yes.
What's the pattern?
Clinton and Obama.
Clinton and Obama, what's the similar about them?
Democrats.
So this one's a Democrat. And this one's a Democrat.
Reagan and Trump.
Sorry?
Reagan and Trump.
Clinton and Trump?
Reagan again. Reagan and Donald Trump.
Reagan and Trump?
Yeah.
What about these two?
Father and son.
Father and son.
You have a father and son? You have father and son. You don't just have that, you have a war with Iraq. You have a war with Iraq. Bill Clinton, despite being married to her, she was involved in his government, worked with the Clinton, Hillary. Obama worked with the Hillary Clinton. Notice the pattern. So who's left? Reagan and Trump. And what are their similarities? It's like a cult of personality. You watch Reagan's old movies and it's really quite sad, you know, when they're punching people and it's so obvious the punches aren't connecting. Just do a blow and someone falls backwards. Wasn't the greatest. But he had this kind of personality through those movie star days of someone who was tough and a countryman and strong, and he was able to capitalize on that But he was a movie star, he's Republican, he's a combination working together with church and state. He is this, won that election through the endorsement of the evangelical churches under Jerry Falwell. So when we get to the history of the 2016 election, we have a new presidential candidate. He also comes out of the media. He's also bringing together church and state under the leadership of Jerry Falwell Jr. And he's also endorsed the Republican Party. So when we look at the pattern of the presidents that we've had through our reform line, and we have 6 of them, just the structure itself tells us this could not have been Clinton. It would have broken the whole pattern of the structure. Can we see that?
Yes.
Bush, father, son, Iraq war. Clinton and Obama, both Democrats, both worked with Hillary Clinton. Both came under attack from a great many conspiracy theories, saying the Clintons were involved in drug cartels and had killed hundreds of people. Obama coming under attack by conspiracy theories. Those theories saying he wasn't born, he wasn't born in America. There's a great many conspiracy theories that were circulated regarding Obama. They were saying that his wife was in fact a man, that she was trans, all of these different things. So the pattern itself identifies that Trump, as the last president, lines up with Reagan as the first president, the first and the last. There's more to Reagan that we need to understand that opens up who Donald Trump is and what he's going to do. So that's just one evidence I wanted to bring out to show, just as extra evidence on top of the mountains we already have, why this history had to be the rise of Donald Trump, not the rise of Hillary Clinton. She could not have fulfilled the specifications of prophecy. So when we get into this subject of what Donald Trump is, who he is, we've started to speak about Jerry Falwell and the moral majority. But I just want to come back and tidy up this point we made here. One of the attacks being levelled against this message majorly misconstrues what we have taught over the last 14 months. One of the things that they're saying is that I taught that the Battle of Raphia would be November 9, 2019. And on November 9 we should see a victory for the King of the South. So they're saying that this is a failed prophecy. And that's why I wanted to bring us back to this story here. What did we actually expect? And if you follow the presentations, I did try and introduce this concept prior to November 9. This is the model we have from 1989, and we have 2 different models that take us to November 9. One of them is the history of 1989 and the 30 years, November 9 to November 9, but there's another study on the revolutions. I want to put the revolutions to the side for a moment and deal with this one. 1989 is a defeat, the beginning of the fall of the King of the South. It's weakened, but from where? From the inside, do you see the King of the North? No. So when we see that the King of the South has a victory, that there's this Battle of Raphia over this time period, what I believe and have taught is that November 9 is not connected to the Battle of Raphia. There are many things that we expected to happen within this reform, whether it's within this year, whether it's Islam or church and state or Raphia or dictatorship. There's multiple events that we expected to transpire. Raphia was just one of them. So if we were to take this story over to here and apply it to the November 9, we would understand that the King of the North, or Trump, I'll just just identify the king of the north, is weakened. But it's from the inside, and you see Russia. No. So we never expected that we would see the troops pulled out on November 9, or Vladimir Putin have some win in Syria or Ukraine, or any of that, because it does not complete the pattern that we expected. So as we've laid out all these different victories that Vladimir Putin has had this year, we did that 2 days ago, and we laid out Ukraine and Syria and Venezuela. Could any of these have been a victory on November 9? No, because are we to see the King of the South? No. You didn't see the King of the North here. You don't see the King of the South here when we're connecting it to the day. The second evidence for that is the lines of the revolutions. When we did all the lines of the revolutions, what was the subject of those studies? The Civil War, Part 1, Civil War, Part 2, yes? Civil War, yes? This is the war inside the United States. This is not the war between the King of the North or the King of the South. The revolutions did not address the King of the South. It addressed civil war within the United States, not externally. Can we see that? So when people say that we should have seen Russia have a win on November 9 of this year, they're misconstruing what we actually taught November 9 was, and also how we see the Battle of Raphia. The Battle of Raphia has been a progressive win from March, but escalated particularly like everything else that happened this year in September. September, when you have Russian victories in Libya and Yemen, in October in Syria, in Africa, in November, in December through China, Ukraine. It's those areas, particularly in the last couple of months from September to December, that we have seen, just in the words of our secular sources themselves, the rise of Russia again as a global superpower. That's why I wanted to mention our expectations here. November 9 is talking about the inside of the United States, the events of the inside, not the events of a war between the King of the North and the King of the South. Either from the history of 1989, and what happened on that specific day, or all of the lines of revolutions that we used to build that logic. So I'm going to erase this for a moment if you don't mind, and I just need some space. I'll just create some space, and I want to look at one of our other expectations. Coming back to this model of Reagan and Trump. One of the other predictions we made this year was to do with the number 490. It took us back to 1529, which 490 years later takes us to 2019. And there were two main events in 1529 that we have highlighted in the presentations over the last 40 months as expectations to be fulfilled in the course of this year. The first one I want us to just briefly touch on is the restraint of Islam. The restraint of radical Islam. So if we were to plot 14, 2019. I'll keep this as our dispensation so we can refer to it. But 1529 to 2019 is 490 years. 1529 was the restraint of Islam. In that history, the restraint of the Ottoman Empire. It was the siege of Vienna where Solomon the Magnificent tried to conquer Eastern Europe. He's been trying to conquer Eastern Europe for some time, but in 1529 he finds his path stopped at Vienna with his first loss. An unsuccessful siege, torrential rains on the journey being largely responsible for halting his progress. His army at one stage having to spend a few days in trees above the floodwaters. His attempt to conquer Europe that had begun years previously came to an end in 1529 with the siege of Vienna. So we marked 490 years, came to 2019, and we said that we would see the restraint of radical Islam, namely in our history, now known as the Islamic State, ISIS. Have we seen this fulfilled?
Yes.
So we come to March 23rd. March 23rd, what happens? March 23rd is known as the collapse of the ISIS caliphate. ISIS' self-proclaimed caliphate in Syria and Iraq came to an end on March 23rd, 2019, when the Syrian Democratic Forces, backed by the US-led international coalition, liberated the town of Baghouz after a tough 6-week battle. So we see the restraint of ISIS in 2019. This was the last town that they held. With its capture, the caliphate collapsed. But the collapse of ISIS didn't end there. We come down to October 26. And again, I said before, I tried to highlight in the last presentation that it is 2014 and to 2019 bookended. So the caliphate begins in 2014, yes?
Yes.
It collapses in 2019, yes? Who becomes the caliph? Baghdad. He's the head of that caliphate. October of 26, there's a strike, and he's killed. Not just he, but also the second in command. So from 2014, again we're bookending, and we did that. We did this bookending all the way back to our subjects of Syria and Venezuela and Ukraine. We bookended all of those. I think we had about 6 or 7 listed, 6 or 7 victories for Vladimir Putin in spheres of influence this year, and every one of them, whether it was China or Africa, we took back and bookended it in 2014 and showed it concluded in 2019. I didn't include ISIS then because it wasn't relevant to the subject of the King of the North or the King of the South. But even when we see the collapse of Islam, we can do the same thing and take it from 14 to 19. So there was a second event in 1529, and this was the protest of the princes. And what are they protesting? They're beginning to protest church and state in such a fashion that they are given the name Protestants. This is the Diet of Spires. I'm going to just read quickly from a couple of quotes from Acts of the Apostles and from the Great Controversy. And I will read quickly and paraphrase for time. The principle for which the disciples stood so fearlessly, when in answer to the command not to speak any more in the name of Jesus, they declared, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye, is the same that the adherents of the gospel struggled to maintain in the days of the Reformation. When in 1529 the German princes assembled at the Diet of Spires, there was presented the emperor's decree restricting religious liberty and prohibiting all further dissemination of the Reformed doctrines. It seemed that the hope of the world was about to be crushed out. Would the princes accept the decree? Should the light of the gospel be shut out from the multitudes still in darkness? Mighty issues for the world were at stake. Those who had accepted the Reformed faith met together, and their unanimous decision was, let us reject this decree. In matters of conscience, the majority has no power. This principle we are in our day firmly to maintain. The banner of truth and religious liberty held aloft by the founders of the Gospel Church and by God's witnesses during the centuries that have passed since then, has in this last conflict been committed to our hands. The responsibility for this great gift rests with those whom God has blessed with the knowledge of His Word. So in 1529, we find the protest of the princes. And as they protested against the coming together of the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, so we marked 490 years and said we would also mark in our time, in 2019, we would mark church plus state. Did the church and state come together in 1529? They did, but was that something new? They've been coming together in the history previous. In the history of 2019, had church and state already been interacting, coming together? We mark that all the way from Reagan, moral majority. But we also see in 2019 church and state, and connected to that, someone must begin to raise a protest, yes? So I want us to come back to what we have been already laid out regarding the history of church and state in America. And much of this will be revision. A revision for many of you. But we'll add a few things to it towards the end. Is this line too low for people to see? Is that too low? At the back, yes. I'm going to raise it and make a higher line, so our brothers and sisters at the back can see. We bring ourselves back to 1989. We're going to go previous to this, 1979. In 1979, an organisation was formed known as the Moral Majority. The catalyst for their coming together was a civil rights movement that had developed in the decades previous, and how that civil rights movement had begun to eradicate segregation in American society. So in the 70s, you have all of these evangelicals start to come together being led by Jerry Falwell. But I want to note he's not the only one. There's Jerry Falwell along with a whole other both religious and political leaders. And he says we've made this false distinction between sacred and secular. Everything is in fact sacred. So it's also identifying that the government of the United States is something sacred, therefore you cannot separate religion from it. Paul Weyrich, one of his associates, says we must come up with a new political philosophy defined by conservatives in moral terms. So what are they trying to bring back? Morality. This is all about bringing back morality through the government of the United States. And the original morality that they were defending was the principle of segregation, which they believed was their biblical mandate. So they became the leaders of this Christian right movement in America. They would say, Jerry Falwell said, we're fighting a holy war. What's happened to America is that the wicked are bearing rule. We have to lead the nation back to the moral stance that made America great. We need to wield influence on those who govern us. So he says that this is a war over morality and it's a holy war. They have their first victory when they get Ronald Reagan elected. Ronald Reagan, that we've marked up here, lining him up directly with Trump. So their first victory is Reagan. Their second victory is Bush Sr. By the time you get to 1989, Jerry Falwell says our mission is accomplished. We've established a government in the United States that will make long-lasting change, and the moral majority dissolves itself. They start to have problems in the history of the Clintons. They try to make a comeback in 1996. There's a tour that Jerry Falwell launches where he goes from church to church and tries to persuade the church leaders to become involved in politics. So again in 1996, he makes a comeback, and then we mark 9/11. And at 9/11 you have all of these both political and evangelical leaders rise up, and they start to say that this terrorist attack was the judgment of God because of immorality. Again, it's all about immorality. After this point in time, after 9/11, through these years, they're still fighting against this secularization of American society. But they start to really lose that battle in the history of Obama. So we mark Obama, really can mark him around 2008. We can mark Obama, and they really start to lose in that war. And we understand that they began out of racist principles. Ellen White says the mindset of the South, that racist mindset, never changes. It didn't change from the history of slavery. It didn't change in the history of segregation. It didn't change in the history of the moral majority. Do you think it all changed when Obama became president? No. So why did they like him? They didn't like him because of the colour of his skin. The same racist principles that have been the stumbling block of America from the very beginning and were demonstrated through the history of the Civil War, through the history of segregation, through the Ku Klux Klan, through the moral majority, all come into our time. None of that mentality has been properly dealt with. So we come down to President Obama, and now we start to see these forces start to rise again, just as they did prior to Reagan. They start to come together because of the civil rights movement. Obama is in himself a type of civil rights movement. He starts fighting for minority rights, tearing apart church and state, handling immigration with compassion, talking about equality and what America is to become. It's another form of the civil rights movement, and they respond in the same way. This time Jerry Falwell is dead, and they're going to respond through his son. And we can mark that process in 2014. But I'll make a little more space. I want us to consider the nature of this. So we're going to go to a couple of different sources. Who else says that we're in a war? His favourite... Sorry? Steve Bannon, what does he say?
We're in a cultural war.
We're in a cultural war. What does he mean by culture war? It's a war between how many cultures? 2. Because he says it's a civil war, so you have 2 sides in a civil war. So Steve Bannon says it's a war between 2 cultures, yes? And what are his 2 cultures? Did you say theocracy? Christian, the Christian right, and I couldn't hear you. The liberals, secular society, is that okay? So Steve Bannon would see the same issue just as Jerry Falwell sees it. Is what's running his whole mentality religious or political? It's a religious mindset that is impacting how he handles the political situation, yes? So when it comes to Steve Bannon, he looks all political. Is he just political? Because he terms it as a culture war, and he sees it as this clash of 2 cultures. One of them is conservative Christianity that he believes has been the bulwark of not just the United States of Europe, and he connects that also with the type of radical, white nationalistic also mentality, white nationalism. And he uses, when he talks about this culture war, I want us to see that he's connecting it to culture or morality. That he sees it as this Christian moral culture at war with this immorality, this immoral culture. And he says that we are at war with not just Islam, because he hasn't been his bonnet about Islam, but he says we're not just at war with Islam, we're also at war with the left and secular society. So secularism. Secularism, another word for immorality. So he has the same mind frame. In 2012, we see Obama win his 2nd election. So in 2012, the Republican nominee is Mitt Romney. He goes head-to-head with Obama, and Obama wins his 2nd election. And really this begins in 2012. Secularly, they mark it in 2012. This is when Steve Bannon, also others, but particularly Bannon, they start to consider how they need to turn America around, how they need to set up some type of moral majority institution and change the government from secular to one supporting white Christian fundamentalism. So he starts considering in 2012 in a very serious way how to do that, and then in January of 2013 he calls a meeting in Breitbart Embassy. So 2013, Steve Bannon calls a meeting we may know of the Breitbart magazine. They call it the Embassy. He's running it at the time. And he calls for a meeting in that Breitbart Embassy, January of 2013, and he brings in 2 of his friends. One of them is Stephen Miller. Do we all know who he is? Good. He hasn't had enough attention in the past, which is dangerous. He's been really the behind-the-scenes organizer of much of Trump's immigration policies. And Jeff Sessions. We all know who Jeff Sessions is. So Steve Bannon calls a meeting January of 2013, and he connects with Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions, and over hours, over a meal, they start to discuss how they're going to change the politics within America. And what conclusion do they come to? If you're going to change the United States, overthrow this liberal Obama has put in place, where do you need to start? Internally with who? With the Republican Party. So much of this is taken from a documentary you can watch online called Zero Tolerance. And it's a frontline documentary. It's particularly going through the immigration policies. It's talking about a zero tolerance immigration policy. So it's centered around immigration, which is why you see particularly Stephen Miller, but also Jeff Sessions. Why would immigration have anything to do with this story? This is a story about church and state. Why, when we're talking about church and state, would we bring in a subject like immigration? Immigration, what happens with what are the immigration they're fighting for? What did Trump say? Why can't we have some of those nice, what country did he say? Norwegians? Why can't we have some of them come? They're not against all immigrants. What immigrants are they against?
That's what countries.
Sorry?
That's what countries.
Third world countries?
And Latin America. They're against immigrants from Latin America.
Sorry?
They're against immigrants from Latin America.
From Latin America? Muslims? You could sum it up with minority populations, but there's also a colour issue. That's impossible to deny. What I want us to see is that it's the same issue here. This might look entirely political if we wanted to look at it through those glasses. But we've approached it from the subject of Jerry Falwell. So Reagan, all of those Republican politicians, they're supporting evangelical Christianity, but the wishes of evangelical Christianity, what they want is to support their ideas of the West. Their ideas of the West being a country that is dominated and controlled by a white Christian majority. It's the same mentality that Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions have when they come together in 2013. That's why it centers around immigration. How are they going to protect their white Christian majority idea of the United States if there's all of these immigrants coming in from third world countries? Quoting from this documentary, it talks about these hardliners, and it speaks of them as always being on the fringe. They're people who are not taken seriously. They decide that if they're going to change the United States and bring it back to its Christian roots, they need to begin, as our brother said, with their own political party. These are all Republicans, yes? And in the earlier presentations that we did, we spoke about first the church, then the world. And we looked at that through a couple of different stories. God's church. First the church, then the world. We looked at it through Satan's church. It's the whole lines of the counterfeit that we've been discussing over the last 14 months. He must first fix his church, and then the world, and we can watch in real time as Francis starts to do that. And then we also can look outside to that, and we can look at the rise of a dictatorship. We looked at Vladimir Putin, but you can look at Trump. You can look at the evangelical right. First, they must deal with their own political party, the Republicans, and then the world. First their own country, first the United States and then the world at Sunday law. So for God's people, it's first the church, then the world at Sunday law. For Satan's church, it's first his own church, and then the world at Sunday law. For the evangelical right, first they have to deal with the United States. They have to take it back from these secularists from Obama. They have to set up their own country in a church and state model. And then at Sunday law, they go to the world, yes? So you have the same principle. And then we also discussed how you see the United States, just as God's church is in 2 steps, so the United States is in 2 steps. If they want to take over their own country, the first step must be their own Republican Party. Begin with your own party, and then you go to the rest of America, the rest of the government. So the first of a 3-step process by which we see this occur is for them to deal with their own Republican Party. And that's the decision that comes out of this meeting with Steve Bannon, Steve Miller and Jeff Sessions. They wanted to take someone down from the GOP being the Republicans. And they have someone in their sights. The House Majority Leader is a man named Eric Cantor. So in this history of Obama, particularly coming into his second term, he wants a new policy on immigration, and it's quite inclusive of minorities. It's quite a compassionate immigration policy. And you actually find the Republicans supporting it. You have not just the Republicans, but also main conservative speakers, Fox News hosts, saying we need to be more compassionate towards immigrants. We need to see their needs, see them as human beings. We need to meet their needs. And the Democrats and the Republicans, we need to come together and solve all of these issues. So there's this real bipartisan coming together to solve these immigration issues in 2013, 2012 and 13, leading into 14. So what these 3 men decide is to change around the government. The first step is to wipe out the moderate Republicans, the Republicans who are willing to compromise and work with Obama, the Republicans who are more middle of the road compassionate, and they need to bring in people who are right-wing, far right-wing Republicans. They begin that process in taking down Eric Cantor, and he's removed in 2014. When he's removed, it's the beginning of the work to reform the Republican Party after the far right. This marks the Republicans getting off the immigration bipartisan reforms they had been participating in. This was a turning point on the immigration issue. They accomplished 2 things in 2014. They removed Eric Cantor, the first House Majority Leader in US history to lose an election, and they killed the immigration reform bill. Those immigration reforms now being unable to pass because of the change that they had reached within the Republican Party. Now they said they needed to find their president. And Steve Bannon said he tried with various people, Sarah Palin, Lou Dobbs, even Jeff Sessions, but Jeff Sessions refused. He says, I won't be your guy, but our guy will come. In this history, Donald Trump speaks about Eric Cantor, and Trump says Eric Cantor lost because of his willingness to work with the Democrats regarding immigration. Steve Bannon decided that their man to do the further work in the 2016 is Donald Trump, and quoting him directly, he said, Donald Trump is a very imperfect instrument, but he is an armor-piercing shell. So these 3 decided to use Donald Trump as part of their plan, further plan, to overturn this liberal order. Stephen Miller quickly endorses him, Jeff Sessions endorses him, and all 3 men become still working together, still with the same agenda that they began in 2013. They began to work together to get Donald Trump elected. Steve Bannon becomes his chief strategist. Stephen Miller, his senior advisor. Jeff Sessions, his attorney general. Bannon says they needed to flood quickly and hard, the shock and awe approach. And so these three working behind Donald Trump, they propel him through that election process. They get him elected in 2016. But that wasn't the end of the battle. The reform needed to continue. Jeff Sessions started doing something else in 2014 as well. And I don't think I'm going to find the article in time. The role of the president is to elect judges to the judiciary, yes? So Obama has, since he became president, he starts this work of appointing judges as his job instructs him to do, part of his mandate. And he's appointing all of these judges to the judiciary. And in 2014, Jeff Sessions becomes, I think he's leader of the House, when they win that House election. So Jeff Sessions takes over that appointment within the House in 2014. And in this year, what does he start doing? He starts blocking all of the nominations that Obama sends in for judges. So you have all of these judges, and there's all these different layers of courts of appeals, right up to the Supreme Court. All of these courts, they're called circuits. The Ninth Circuit gets a lot of attention. So judges start either dying or they start retiring, and Obama wants to appoint judges and fill their places. And so Obama will send through an instruction that such and such a judge is to be appointed to the judiciary. In 2014, Jeff Sessions just starts stalling. He won't appoint any judge that Obama elects. And he has a plan in doing this, quite a diabolical plan. Jeff Sessions' plan in 2014 is that the next president is going to be a radical conservative Republican. So if he can block as many judicial appointments as he possibly can, then when they bring in this radical right-leaning conservative, then it will be that conservative Republican government that can step in and fill all of these positions. So the reason that we talked about this, there's three enemies that Donald Trump has to conquer: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. He took one in 2016, he took the executive. But it's been an ongoing work to take over the judicial and the legislative. Has Donald Trump now done with the judicial? There's been a lot of talk in the last couple of months, particularly the last couple of months, of how Donald Trump has, from 16 to 19, particularly this year, swung the court system in America, the judicial system, to where now they are primarily conservative, Christian-leaning judges. The reason that he could take over the judicial system was because back in 2014, Jeff Sessions started blocking Obama from being able to fill any of these positions. So when Donald Trump became president, he had all of these open spaces, and he brags about that often, about how he's been able to appoint so many judges. I think he's appointed more judges so far than Obama did in his whole 2 terms as president. So I just wanted to mark that as well. Again, it's a 14-19 bookend between taking over the judicial system and the beginning of Jeff Sessions keeping those spaces open until he could get a conservative president elected. And why is the judicial system so important when it comes to prophecy?
The Western Front.
Sorry?
The Western Front.
The Western Front? And the speaking? How does the dragon speak? Through the judicial system. So what have they just set up? They've set up a system that's willing and ready now to speak as a dragon. They've set up evangelical Christian judges where they now have a teetering on the edge, but in reality right-leaning Supreme Court. They've taken over all of these lower circuits to such a degree, and I will just quickly see if I can't find at least one of the articles speaking of this. Even those who support Trump said one of the best things he's done this year is his work in overturning the judicial system. This is Washington Post. One in every circuit court judges is now a Trump appointee. After 3 years in office, President Trump has remade the federal judiciary, ensuring a conservative tilt for decades and cementing his legacy no matter the outcome of the 2020 election. Trump nominees make up 1 in 4 US Circuit Court judges. 2 of his picks sit on the Supreme Court, and this past week, as the House voted to impeach the president, the Republican-led Senate confirmed an additional 13 district court judges. In total, Trump has installed 187 judges to the federal bench. Trump's mark on the judiciary is already having far-reaching effects on legislation and liberal priorities. Just last week, the Fifth Circuit struck down a core provision of the Affordable Care Act. One of the 2 appellate judges who ruled against the landmark was a Trump appointee. The Supreme Court, where 2 of the 9 justices are conservatives selected by Trump himself, could eventually also hear that case. The 13 circuit courts are the second most powerful in the nation, serving as a last stop for appeals on lower court rulings, unless the case is taken up by the Supreme Court. So far, Trump has appointed 50 judges to circuit court benches. Comparatively, by this point in President Obama's term, he had confirmed 25. At the end of 2 terms, 8 years, he'd only appointed 55. Trump's appointments have flipped 3 circuit courts to majority Republican-appointed judges, including the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in New York. The president has also selected younger conservatives for these lifetime appointments. You serve at these appointments for the term of your entire life. The executor of this aggressive push is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Sorry, I think I've confused Jeff Sessions and Mitch McConnell. I always do this. Jeff Sessions worked with Stephen Bannon and Steve Miller over immigration. With the justices, this was not Jeff Sessions, this was Mitch McConnell. The executive of this aggressive push is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is almost singularly focused on reshaping the federal judiciary, twice ramming through Senate rule changes to speed up confirmations over Democrats' objections. He has a mantra, leave no vacancy behind, and he stated that publicly. They marked that back in 2016. The highest court in the US is the Supreme Court. In 2016, one of those judges of the Supreme Court, there's supposed to be 9 of them, one died. Obama elected someone to fill his place, and McConnell refused to allow the Supreme Court nominee to be elected. McConnell insisted on waiting until after the 2016 election, a gamble that paid off when Trump beat Democrat Hillary Clinton. Trump appointed conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch for the seat. McConnell has repeatedly described Lockie Garland, Obama's appointee for the Supreme Court, as one of his greatest achievements in politics. Before leaving town for the holidays, Senate Republicans hailed McConnell's success. This is recent. You didn't think that McConnell would leave town without confirming more judges, did you? The Senate Republican Communications Center tweeted Friday with a breakdown of the number of judges confirmed since January. Trump said, I have heard, actually, that when you become president, the most important thing you can do is appoint federal judges. The 3 circuit courts that have flipped to Republican majorities this year have the potential to not only change policy, but also benefit Trump professionally and politically. and it starts to list all the things that are going to go through these circuits that have now lent to the Republican majority. They're going to hear cases about Trump's use on Twitter, his blocking of critics, his usage of his own businesses. Quoting President Trump, "Now, President Obama was very nice to us, wasn't he? He gave us 142 empty positions. That's how many empty court positions existed by the time Trump became president. 142 that Mitch McConnell blocked. He says that's never happened before. But as you know, that's said to be the most important thing that a president has." When Fox News host Sean Hannity made a similar remark while interviewing McConnell on his show recently, the majority leader made clear that Obama didn't leave those 142 vacancies intentionally. "I will tell you why. I was in charge of what we did the last 2 years of the Obama administration," McConnell said, laughing. "I'll give you full credit for that, and by the way, take a bow," Hannity responded. In April, McConnell limited debate on Trump nominees from 30 hours, so the Democrats are supposed to have 30 hours to debate whether or not these judges can be appointed. McConnell changed that from 30 hours, he now gives them 2 hours, which has allowed him to push through judges at warp speed. There's a few other changes he made as well. When the Democrats lost the Senate in 2014, McConnell gained the power to stall Obama nominees, leaving Trump with all of the vacancies. It continues. But again, we're still marking dispensational bookends. The work of Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, Jeff Sessions to work within the Republican Party begins in 2014, throwing out the centrists. We took that to 2019, and when you had the impeachment, how many Republicans voted against Trump? 0%. 100% Republican loyalty. Why? Because from 14 to 19, every Republican, from Eric Cantor all the way down through this list, has either quit or resigned that was willing to, in the smallest way, criticize Donald Trump. Now we have 100% loyalty of his political party. And what did we say was the first evidence of a dictator? They purged their own political party, yes? What did Hitler do the minute he took power? Purged. Stalin? Purged. What has Donald Trump just done? Purged. But it began in 2014 before he became president. They already began the purging of their political party. Before you have a political party that's willing to criticize the president, you have 2016, even as he's running for president, they're criticizing him. You come down to 2019 and you have 100% political party loyalty. That's one bookend. Second bookend, we went to Mitch McConnell and we looked at the judicial system. 2014, he starts to block Obama from appointing judges to fill in the vacancies in the judicial system. You get to 2019 and what has Donald Trump done? He's switched the judicial system, the method by which the United States speaks, from being a Democrat, liberal, or balanced. The Supreme Court in the past year of history was balanced between 4 liberal, 4 conservative, and 1 middling. They'd always tried to keep a balance. He switched all of this to become right-leaning. In this history, there's conflict between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions over the Russia investigation, and Jeff Sessions wants to step down. He wants to quit his work as, I think he was at that stage, Jeff Sessions was prepared to resign. Steve Bannon went to Jeff Sessions. This is after Trump has won the election. Jeff Sessions is in conflict with Trump. Trump is starting to attack Jeff Sessions, and Jeff Sessions says he wants to resign. And Bannon goes to Jeff Sessions, and Bannon says to him, "Jeff, you were here at the very beginning. You were here with me when we planned all this back in 2013. I said, you were there from the beginning. I said, You were shotgun with me the entire time. Do you know what it means to ride shotgun? It means you're in the front seat of the car. If we were to go and get in the car and you were to ride shotgun, you sit in the front seat. So Bannon says, you're in the front seat with me the entire time. I said, is there any doubt in your mind that this was divine providence that put us here? What has Steve Bannon just said? Who led in all of this work in his mind? God, divine providence. Steve Bannon is doing all of this just as Jerry Falwell did, with the idea that this is the will of God and the work of God. He says, this didn't just happen. This isn't coincidence. Something has worked here. God has worked here. Trump is a very important instrument, imperfect instrument, but we are here, and you are never going to quit. And Jeff Sessions says, I will never quit. He has given a pep talk that he needed. But I want us to note Bannon's words. He recognizes he's the one that I've quoted who actually gave this history of 13 and 14. You can go onto YouTube and watch it in his own words. And he's acknowledging, saying again, these three, they were here at the very beginning. They rode the front seat of this car that took them to the Donald Trump presidency and through this history, and he sees this entire journey as being divine providence or the work of God. Quoting Steve Bannon, from the dinner we had in 2013, we had brought security, immigration to the forefront of politics. Right now we are engaged as a nation, and I think in 2020 it is going to be even more of a centerpiece in the national debate, as it should be. For Sessions, Bannon and Miller, it was all part of a grand design. So even when we see this overturning of, and this is an overturning of the United States, the overthrowing of democracy, and we know that we also see democracy overthrown at Panion and Sunday Law. You can see it at 16, 19, 21 Sunday Law. 4 waymarks where we mark dictatorship and the overthrowing of democracy. But in this model, you can see it in 2019 with what they have done through the judicial system, how they've elected Donald Trump, and how they've changed the Republican Party to one of 100% loyalty to their president. If you have 100% loyalty to your president, that is a dictatorship. There was a Democrat that responded to this, that there was a Republican politician sat next to Trump in an interview, and he turned to Trump and said, no matter what you do, I will always 100% support you. And a Democrat stood up and spoke, and he says, I don't care if we had a Democrat president, I don't care what president we have. I would never tell him that he had my 100% support. That is not how a democracy works. I want to bring up one other person. We all know William Barr. William Barr is the Attorney General of the United States. He's been Attorney General before. He became the Assistant Attorney General. He's known as Bill Barr, more familiarly. Bill Barr, more familiar, but proper name William Barr. He became the Assistant Attorney General in 1989. The first time he started taking up this position. He became Deputy Attorney General in 1990, and he became the Attorney General in 1991. This is the rise of William Barr. 1989, Assistant Attorney General. 1990, Deputy Attorney General. 1991, Attorney General, top position. So this was his first stint as Attorney General. And then he steps down and took other positions. He becomes the Attorney General again in 2019. I want us to look at this man that Donald Trump elected to be Attorney General. In 1989, at the beginning of his administration, President George Bush appointed Barr to the US Department of Justice as Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel, an office which functions as the legal advisor for the President and executive agencies. Barr was known as a strong defender of presidential power. He wrote an advisory opinion justifying the US invasion of Panama and the arrest of Manuel Noriega. He wrote legal justifications for the practice of rendition, that the FBI could enter onto foreign soil without the consent of the host government to apprehend fugitives wanted by the United States government. His singular characteristic is how he sees executive power. He sees the executive power, and the executive power means the executive branch or the President of the United States. He sees executive power or presidential power in its most unlimited form. And that's the characteristic he shows in his history when he's first appointed by George Bush Sr. What he believes is that the President has the farthest extreme of political power that one can debate within the US political system. He believes, he argues, and even argued recently with Trump, that the President has the complete authority to start or stop any law enforcement proceeding. So if Donald Trump is being investigated, Donald Trump as President can just cancel that investigation. He believes in a presidency or an executive branch that is above the law, and he's spoken about that. He's on a mission to use the authority of the executive branch to see the authority of the executive branch in its utmost form. So Donald Trump was very wise to appoint him in 2019. Here again he becomes the Attorney General, and I want us to note two things about him. First of all, he believes in the executive branch, the President, having almost unlimited power, really unlimited power if he can start and stop any law proceeding he chooses. So he believes that the Russia investigation was inappropriate, can't investigate the President. He believes that any conflict or any investigation over Ukraine is unacceptable. All of these investigations, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, anything that has been launched against Donald Trump since 16 to 19, William Barr would believe is unacceptable, because Donald Trump, as President of the United States, cannot be investigated, cannot be charged with a crime. He cannot have a law proceeding brought against him that he himself cannot cancel. He essentially believes in a dictatorship. I want to quote from another Washington Post article. New York Times, I just found it. This is the New York Times. This one is a must read. It's titled, Bill Barr thinks America is going to hell, and is on a mission to use the authority of the executive branch to stop America going to hell. Why would a seemingly respectable, semi-retired lion of the Washington establishment, Bill Barr, undermine the institutions he is sworn to uphold, incinerate his own reputation, and appear to willfully misrepresent the report of special prosecutors and inspector generals? They're talking about the Russia investigation, how he undermined that. all to defend one of the most lawless and corrupt presidents in American history. And why has this particular Attorney General appeared at this pivotal moment, 2019, in our republic? A deeper understanding of William Barr is emerging, and it reveals something profound and disturbing about the evolution of conservatism in 21st century America. Some people have held that Mr. Barr is simply a partisan hack. Partisan hack meaning he's so loyal to republicanism he has no moral compass, willing to do whatever it takes to advance the interests of his own political party and its leadership. This view finds ample support in Mr. Barr's own words. In November 15's speech at the Federalist Society's National Lawyers Convention in Washington, he accused President Trump's political opponents of unprecedented abuse and said they were engaged in the systematic shredding of norms and the undermining of the rule of law. It is hardly the first time Mr. Barr stepped outside of long-established norms for the behaviour of Attorney General. In his earliest stint as Attorney General, during the George Bush presidency, Sr., Mr. Barr took on the role of helping to disappear the case against Reagan administration officials involved in the Iran-Contra affair, so covered up for Reagan. The situation demonstrated that powerful people with powerful allies can commit serious crimes in high office, according to Lawrence Walsh, the independent prosecutor in that case. According to some critics, Mr. Barr delivered the partisan goods then, and he's delivering them now. Another view is that Mr. Barr is principally a defender of a certain interpretation of the Constitution that attributes maximum power to the executive branch. This view too finds ample support in Mr. Barr's own words. In a speech to the Federalist Society, he said, "Since the mid-60s, 1960s, there has been a steady grinding down of the executive branch's authority that accelerated after Watergate, Nixon. In July, when President Trump claimed in remarks to a conservative student group, 'I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president.' It is reasonable to suppose this is his Cliff Notes version of Mr. Barr's ideology. So Trump says, 'I have an Article 2 that says I have the right to do anything I want as president.' Both of these views of Barr are accurate enough. But at least since Mr. Barr's infamous speech at the University of Notre Dame Law School, in which he blamed secularists for moral chaos and immense suffering, wreckage and misery, it has become clear that no understanding of William Barr can be complete without taking into account his views on the role of religion in society. For that, it is illuminating to review how Mr. Barr has directed his Justice Department on matters concerning the First Amendment clause forbidding the establishment of a state religion. Church and state, the relationship between church and state. In Maryland, the department rushed to defend taxpayer funding for a religious school that says same-sex marriage is wrong. In Maine, it is defending parents suing over a state law that bans religious schools from obtaining taxpayer funding to promote their own sectarian doctrines. At his Department of Justice, Mr. Barr told law students in Notre Dame, "We keep an eye out for cases or events around the country where states are misapplying the Establishment Clause in a way that discriminates against people of faith. In these and other cases, Mr. Barr has embraced wholesale the religious liberty rhetoric of today's Christian nationalist movement. Slavery was defended on what premise? I can defend that from the Bible. It's my religious right to own slaves. Back in this history, I can defend it from the Bible. It's my religious right to discriminate. It's always defended under the banner of religious liberty, a twisted, counterfeit religious liberty. When religious nationalists invoke religious freedom, it is typically coded for religious privilege. The freedom they have in mind is the freedom of people of certain conservative and authoritarian varieties of religion to discriminate against those of whom they disapprove or over whom they wish to exert power. So they don't say freedom of religion to support Muslims any more than in 1888 the Protestants said freedom of religion is freedom to keep Saturday. They're using the concept of freedom of religion to defend their version of religion, whether that's Sunday keeping or in this context of 2019. This form of religious liberty seeks to foment the sense of persecution and paranoia of a collection of conservative religious groups that see themselves as on the cusp of losing their rightful position of dominance over American culture. It always singles out groups that can be blamed for society's ills, and that may be subject to state-sanctioned discrimination and belittlement. LGBT Americans, secularists, and Muslims are the favoured targets, but others are available. The purpose of this religious liberty rhetoric is not just to secure a place of privilege, but also to justify public funding for the right kind of religion. Mr. Barr has a long history of supporting this type of religious liberty. At Notre Dame, he compared alleged violations of religious liberty with Roman emperors forcing Christian subjects to partake in pagan sacrifices. Quoting him, "The law is being used as a battering ram to break down traditional moral values and to establish moral relativism as a new orthodoxy." So what is he defending? Morality. Barr watchers will know that this is nothing new. In a 1995 article he wrote for the Catholic Lawyer, who's a strong Catholic, which, as Emily Fazelon recently pointed out, appears to be something of a blueprint for his recent speech at Notre Dame. He complained that we live in an increasingly militant, secular age, and expressed his grave concern that the law might force landlords to rent to unmarried couples. He implied that the idea that universities might treat homosexual activist groups like any other student group was intolerable. This form of religious liberty is not a mere side issue for Mr. Barr or the other religious nationalists who have come to dominate the Republican Party. Mr. Barr has made this clear. All the problems of modernity, quote, the wreckage of the family, record levels of depression and mental illness, drug addiction, senseless violence, stem from the loss of a strict interpretation of the Christian religion. The great evildoers in the Notre Dame speech are non-believers who are apparently out on the streets ransacking everything that is good and holy. The solutions to society's ills, Mr. Barr declared, come from faith. Quoting him, "Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct." Who said that we quoted yesterday? Vladimir Putin. North and south. Polar opposites, many ways identical. Judeo-Christian moral standards. That's what Jerry Falwell fought for. The Judeo-Christian West moral standards, what Steve Bannon fights for. Religion helps frame moral culture within society that instills and reinforces moral discipline, he added. The fact is that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion. So what is he saying? If we want a moral society, we have to enforce morality, evangelical Christian, and he is Catholic, Steve Bannon is Catholic, their version of morality through the government, through the Republican Party. With this ideological framework, the ends justify the means. In this light, the first two we discussed, his hyper-partisanship, support for the Republican Party, is the symptom, not the disease. The symptom is his loyalty to the Republican Party. What is the disease? His belief that his Christian morality must be enforced through the government for the protection of America. It's the symptom, his partisanship is the symptom, not the malady. At Christian nationalist gatherings and strategy meetings, the Democratic Party and its supporters are routinely described as demonic and associated with the rulers of darkness. They're using religious language. Those who support Trump have said, frankly, the evangelical leaders and politicians, that to support Trump, to vote for Trump, is to vote for God. If you know that society is under dire existential threat from secularists, and you know that they have all found a home in the other party, every conceivable compromise with principles, every ethical breach, every backroom deal is not only justifiable but imperative. And that the vicious reaction to Christianity Today's anti-Trump editorial demonstrates, any break with this partisan alignment will be instantly denounced as heresy. They've brought together their concepts of morality and Christianity with their own government. It is also clear that Mr. Barr's maximum interpretation of the power of the President is an effect rather than a cause of his ideological commitments. It, in fact, isn't really an interpretation, it is an unfounded assertion that the President has made a mount of monarchical powers. Douglas Mike, a law professor at Pepperdine, who once held Mr. Barr's position as head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, spoke of Mr. Barr's theory. He says King George III would have loved it. It's almost beside the point to note, as the Conservative lawyers group Checks and Balances recently wrote, that Mr. Barr's view of history that the evangelical branch has this maximum power has no factual basis. Mr. Barr's constitutional interpretations is just a cover for his commitment to religious authoritarianism. And that really gets to the heart of the matter. If you know anything about American founders, you know they were passionately opposed to the idea of a religious monarchy. And this is the key to understanding the question, what does Bill Barr want? What they have brought together, whether it's Stephen Miller, Jeff Sessions, Steve Bannon, we haven't even begun to touch on Jerry Falwell Jr. in this history or the evangelicals. We're just looking at it from the politician's point of view. And what they're trying to bring and have brought together in America is this 100% Republican Party loyalty that is loyal to a president, not just as a president, but their only hope to enforce Christian morality and the will of God for the nation. To vote against Trump is to vote against God, in their own words. We see this through all of these people that we haven't even discussed yet, and many others that we won't have time to talk about. But I wanted to discuss William Barr because he is Attorney General of the United States, and what the power that he actually has right now through the various branches is already able to start manipulating and twisting the investigations into Trump, such as the Russia investigation. He starts to undermine that. He's able to give credence to the conspiracy theories that Donald Trump is sharing. I know that we have gone for a long time. I have one other element to add. Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, Paula White, who's just been appointed to an official White House position. These are two evangelical leaders who say that Donald Trump was ordained by God to run America in opposition to the rise of this secularism. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump's former press secretary, told TV preacher Pat Robertson, "I think God calls all of us to fill different roles at different times, and I think that God wanted Donald Trump to become president. That's why he's here, and I think he's done a tremendous job supporting a lot of things that people of faith really care about." That is the former press secretary of the president. Mike Pompeo likened Trump to Queen Esther, again another politician, saying Trump is Queen Esther, saving America from secularism. Pompeo, could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from that Iranian menace? Pompeo, who was visiting Israel at the time, said, "As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible." Trump's campaign manager, Brad Pascal, is the latest to join. He says, "There has never been and probably never will be a movement like this again. Only God could deliver such a savior to our nation, and only God could allow me to help God bless America." So Donald Trump has been raised by God as a savior of America. Donald Trump recently, also this year, looking to the heavens, saying, "I am the chosen one." And all of his supporters, whether they're evangelicals or politicians, have fed to him this narrative that he has readily embraced, that he is appointed by God. And when you're appointed by God, is there a limit on your power? No limit on your power. don't have time, compare and contrast to the internal. What has Elder Jeff essentially said? Nothing is off the table because he believes he's appointed by God, and Parminder and I in rebellion a few thousand years ago, he would have speared us and physically killed us. So now there is nothing off the table, whether it's spreading conspiracy theories or slander or misrepresenting what we teach. Everything is an option if you believe that you are appointed by God and on the right side. And we see the exact same tactics, but we won't go into that. I want to touch on one last subject. And this also is giving credence to what they believe. In 2005, there was an American Christian firefighter. He was married to a woman named Mary Jo. His name's Mark. He's married to Mary. He's a Christian firefighter in America. In 2005, there's a drug house in America that catches fire. He runs into this drug house, into this fire, and he carries out the body in front of everyone. He carries out the body of this dead child. He starts to have feverish dreams. He's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. His doctor diagnoses him with post-traumatic stress. However, he doesn't take his medication. He resigns as a firefighter, and he's spending 6 years from 2005 to 2011. He's suffering with this disorder, having lack of sleep, hypersomnia, and nightmares about being taken hostage by a fire demon from hell. While watching television, he starts watching a lot of television to try and numb his illness. And his wife Mary, strong Christian, evangelical, starts praying to God to help heal her husband. He starts having dreams about this glowing orb, supposedly God, that explodes electrical energy onto him. While hearing Donald Trump on television news, Taylor supposedly receives a message from God. This is in 2011. He receives a message from God which he writes down in a journal informing him, "You're hearing the voice of the President of the United States." So this is known as the Trump prophecy. It's in 2011 and he claims to have this vision. Taylor, he said through the 2012 election, he's watching that election Donald Trump was saying he would run, and he's hoping he'll see it fulfilled. Instead, he sees Barack Obama win re-election. He continues journaling accounts of his dreams and hearings from God in the run-up to the 2016 election. Then he shares his writings with his doctor, Don Colbert, and his wife, Mary Colbert. So his doctor, Don and Mary. Mary starts reading through all these prophecies that he supposedly had, and she starts to feel that there's this rhythm to it, this pattern. And she builds up this national prayer chain. So prior to Donald Trump's election, through this vision known as the Trump prophecy, this doctor's wife, she takes this man's vision and she builds this national movement with all of these people who connect to each other via phone and instructs them to begin using religious symbols, I'll describe it in a moment, to try and help Donald Trump win this election. They use the shofar, which is the Israelite horn, and they start blowing the shofar. So they go through these rituals in order to increase the chances of Trump winning the election. Despite several news reports of the unlikelihood of Trump being elected, the miracle occurs and he wins, leaving Mark and Mary Taylor happy and relieved. Worldwide coverage of Mary Colbert's shofar group influences Israelis to start their own group of people blowing the shofar horn. So in 2011, this traumatized firefighter, he's supposed to have this vision that Donald Trump is the President of the United States, will be. He writes it down. He takes it to his doctor just prior to in the history of the 2016 election. His doctor's wife takes them and she starts this nationwide movement of people praying to God that this prophecy will be fulfilled. Donald Trump wins that election, but in this history, Jerry Falwell, this is Jerry Falwell of Liberty University. Jerry Falwell and Liberty University take this prophecy and they make it into a movie. So this movie was released in the United States in 2018. You can look it up, you can watch it, you can watch the trailer, known as the Trump prophecy, and it was released on only 2 days in that year. Those 2 days that it played in cinemas is October 2 and October 4, 2018. When did the midnight cry arrive in the United States? October 3. October 3, the United States arrives in the midnight cry arrives in the United States. Did we have a prophecy on Donald Trump? Question. Do we have 2 streams of information in the United States? Yes. We have the Trump prophecy, the midnight cry of October 3rd. They released theirs on October 2nd and October 4th. Again through Jerry Falwell, supported Reagan, through Liberty University and the moral majority. Exact same way Donald Trump, supported by Liberty University, Jerry Falwell, and his own form of the moral majority. We're out of time and we have to stop. What I want us to see is this. If you were to stand outside tonight and you were to watch the sun go down below the horizon, you watch it up in the sky and it's right above your head. And then you kind of watch it descend, you start to see the colours arise, it starts to go orange and red, and then it starts to dip below the horizon. Soon it's below the horizon, the colours are fading, it gets darker and darker, and then it's pitch black. I want to use that type of parable to describe our history. If we watch really closely and we understand, as we start to understand in more detail, we follow the internal message closely, that's necessary, we must do that. We follow the external message closely, that's necessary. We must follow what is happening in the United States, the overthrowing of the judicial system. We should be following that. This is America ready to speak as a dragon now. We should be following the internal and the external histories. But many of us, including myself, we're busy, we get distracted. If you're going to watch the sun dip below the horizon, whether or not you can mark the exact point it happens, the exact point that little line goes below the horizon, doesn't mean that you can stand in a pitch black night and say the sun hasn't set. Does that make sense? So if we were to use this parable, whether or not we want to put one singular point in time when church and state came together in the United States, and I'm sure we will have named waymarks as we actually focus on the history we're supposed to be following, do our duty in following this history. But can we see that even if we aren't yet going to a one date for the time church and state came together, can we see that the sun has set? Because whether or not you've actually seen the moment the sun has gone below the horizon, you know it has. The same way, we can go through this history and can we see a dictator in the United States who has the entire 100% loyalty of his political party and of his supporters because they see him as a representative of God. They cannot vote against him. It does not matter how many wives he has. It doesn't matter how he cheats on them. He is their King Cyrus. If God raised him up, how can they oppose him? How would they even ever dare to vote to impeach him? He's been raised by God. They have a demagogue. They have church and state, and they have a king. The separation of church and state in the United States is over. Whether or not you want to put one date to it, you can see the stars, you know the sun has gone. That's what I wanted us to see. We can bookend it with 14 to 19. We can see the work of these men, the overthrowing of the Republican Party. We can see the overthrowing of the judicial system. You can see church and state from 14 to 19. That is all bookended without even talking about raffia and north and south. But we have all the evidence we need to see that the United States already has a dictatorship set up. They already have an executive branch with unlimited power because he is seen as a representative of God. Repeating the history, that we began to bookend originally with Ronald Reagan. Do we have more to learn? Yes, but at the very least we should have this in our minds as we further investigate. If you go with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. We look at what is happening in the United States. We look at the white nationalism. We look at the coming together of the evangelicals to persecute minorities. We look at Donald Trump and we see all of what you are not. Lord, thank you that we have such hope, such a message that does not just have light and power, as those who fail have, but we also have love, joy, peace, and light and power. I pray, Lord, that as we look at these things, that we will understand better your character, that this is not the way you understand morality, that this is not the way you implement morality. Lord, I pray that through the confusion of the sheer mass of external events and all the noise surrounding us, we can see the clear fulfillment of prophecy. Just as you showed us 40 months ago we would see, just as we expected to see the church and state, just as we expected to see the judicial system fall and America ready to speak as a dragon. Lord, we know that these are fulfillments of prophecy. I pray, Lord, that you'll give us greater clarity, not just on the future, but also to look back, to revisit these histories and see what we have missed. Lord, thank you for this camp meeting. We have been able to come together as brethren. You have blessed our time together, our interactions, both at meals and between classes. Lord, I pray that we will all meet again soon. Bring us into a closer and closer unity. We read those words on New Year's Eve, praying, Lord, that heading into this new year we would put away every shred of bitterness, that we would unite selflessly to do your work. I pray, Lord, that we will have this right spirit to be united as a worldwide movement and as united also the work in Kenya. Lord, you have appointed a leadership here. We see externally a test of their leadership. Internally, there's a test of leadership. And Lord, you have people that you also are working through in Kenya. I pray for them. I pray for Sister Rispa. Lift up her arms, give her strength as she moves forward in the work that you desire her to do. I pray for all of those in Kenya doing this work, sharing your message, those that are about to share, those who are finding their voices. Lord, that you have taught and led into this movement, those who have a plan for, who have not yet raised their voices. Inspire them and strengthen them, teach them, Lord. I pray that we will do our part to uplift and to be a blessing to them. May we not be as those that tear down. May we be as those that unite. Work to heal the gaps between brothers and sisters. Lord, you know the scars of the past history. You know the personal scars that we have in our own hearts, the scars between brethren. Lord, I pray that you'll bring healing, that we can be fully equipped, set up and equipped to do the work that we must begin in a very short space of time. I pray, Lord, you'll bless all those as they travel home. May these things stay in their minds and their hearts to be contemplated on. And may they not fear in seeing how you have not just led in the past, but you have also told us, given us clear messages that tell us how you have led in the past, how you are leading in the present, and how you will lead in the future. I pray we have this faith in Jesus' name. Amen.